The first time Brian James picked up a guitar, something changed. It wasn't just music to him. It was a way to break free, to shake the world awake. He didn't just play chords, he attacked them. His sound was raw, wild, and full of energy, like a thunderstorm rolling through a quiet town. He didn't follow the rules of music, he tore them apart. Without him, punk rock might never have been what it became. He wasn't just a musician, he was the spark that lit the fire. And once that fire started, there was no stopping it. On March 6, 2025, the world lost Brian James. He was 70 years old, surrounded by his family as he took his last breath. Though his body is gone, his music will never fade. His energy, his passion, his fearless approach to sound will live on forever. For those who knew him, played alongside him, or grew up with the electric roar of new rose in their ears, this loss is more than just the passing of a musician. It feels like the end of an era, the closing of a chapter in rock history. But Brian James never believed in endings. He was always moving forward, always searching for the next great sound. If you really want to understand his legacy, you have to go back to where it all started. To the moment a boy from Hammersmith picked up a guitar for the first time and decided that music should be loud, wild, and full of life. Brian James was born Brian Robertson on February 18, 1955 in Hammersmith, London, a city where music was everywhere. It poured out of radios, filled record shops, and echoed from the stages of smoky clubs. The British invasion had taken over the world, with the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and the Kinks shaping the sound of a generation. Their music was catchy, clever, and polished, the kind of sound that made parents nod along and teenagers sing in harmony. But Brian wasn't interested in polished. He didn't want music that felt safe or predictable. He was searching for something wilder, something that made his heart race and his skin tingle. It was the rough, untamed energy of American bands that grabbed him by the collar and shook him awake. The Stooges, MC5, the New York Dolls, these weren't just musicians. They were troublemakers, rebels who played as if they had nothing to lose. Their guitars were loud, their drums crashed like thunder, and their voices weren't sweet and smooth, but raw, ragged, and real. They weren't here to entertain politely. They were here to start a riot. That was the kind of music Brian wanted to play. Music that didn't ask for permission. Music that hit like a punch to the gut. As a teenager, he picked up a guitar and started experimenting. He wasn't trying to be a rock star. He just wanted to make noise, to find that sound inside of him that refused to be silenced. He played in band after band, pushing limits, testing ideas. And as he played, something was happening in London. The city's music scene was changing. The old ways were cracking. Something fresh was rising. Something angry. Something dangerous. Brian could feel it. He knew he was part of it. He knew his time was coming. By 1976, the UK music scene was teetering on the edge of something big. The old guard of rock stars had become untouchable, distant, lost in their own fame. The kids wanted something real. Something they could grab onto, something that spoke to their frustration, their boredom, their rage. Brian James found himself at the center of that storm. He pulled together a band, Dave Vanian on vocals, Captain Sensible on bass, Rat Scabies on drums, and The Damned was born. They didn't just want to play music, they wanted to rip apart the establishment. They wanted to be the first to do everything, and they were. In October of 1976, The Damned made history by releasing the first punk single in the UK. New Rose hit like a bomb. It was fast, it was raw, it was the sound of a new generation. No one had ever heard anything like it before. It was Brian's song, his creation, his stamp on the world, and it changed everything. While the Sex Pistols were still figuring out their sound and the Clash were writing their first album, The Damned were already making history. A few months later, in early 1977, they did it again by releasing the first ever full-length punk album in the UK, Damned, Damned, Damned. It was wild, reckless, filled with energy that couldn't be contained. And at the center of it was Brian James, his guitar roaring like a chainsaw through every track. The Damned weren't just making music. They were setting the standard for what punk was supposed to be. They were the first UK punk band to tour. The United States bringing their chaotic energy across the ocean and influencing a whole new wave of musicians. Brian was the driving force behind it all. His songs, his sound, his vision, punk was never built to last. It was a wildfire, spreading fast, burning bright, and leaving its mark before moving on. The Damned had been at the forefront of that explosion, but by the time their second album, Music for Pleasure, was released, in 1977, things were beginning to shift. The album, produced by Pink Floyd's Nick Mason, had a different feel from their groundbreaking debut. It lacked the same raw, unfiltered energy that had made Damned, Damned, Damned so electrifying. The magic was fading, and so was Brian's connection to the band. By the end of 1977, he made the decision to leave. There was no dramatic fallout, no bitter arguments, just the quiet understanding that it was time to move on. The Damned continued, without him, evolving into something different, something bigger in the years that followed. But Brian wasn't one to look back. He had always been about what came next. And what came next was something new, something darker, something that took punk's rebellious spirit and twisted it into something even more dangerous. He formed Tans der Youth, a short-lived but forward-thinking band that experimented with elements of post-punk and new wave. It was moodier, more atmospheric, a sign that Brian was already thinking beyond the traditional punk formula. But his real next chapter came in the early 80s when he teamed up with Steve Bators, the wild and charismatic frontman of the Dead Boys. Together, they created the Lords of the New Church. The Lords weren't just another punk band. They took the sneering, rebellious energy of punk and mixed it with something theatrical, something gothic. Their music was still aggressive, still defiant, but it was also more layered, more complex. Over the course of 3 albums, they pushed the boundaries of what punk could be. This wasn't just about noise and rebellion anymore, it was about evolution. And Brian James was once again at the heart of it. Brian James never put down his guitar. Music wasn't just something he did, it was who he was. Even after his time with the Damned and the Lords of the New Church, he kept creating, always searching for the next sound, the next project that could push boundaries. He formed the Dripping Lips, played with rock legends like Iggy Pop and Wayne, Kramer, and worked on solo records that proved he was still a force to be reckoned with. He wasn't interested in fame or reliving past glories. He just wanted to play, to experiment, to keep music alive in its rawest form. Then, in 2022, something incredible happened. After decades apart, the original members of the Damned, Brian, Dave Vanian, Captain Sensible, and Rat Scabies, reunited. For fans, it was more than just a concert. It was history coming full circle. The moment Brian's guitar roared through the speakers, it was as if no time had passed. The fire was still there, the energy still untamed. The crowd wasn't just old-school punks who had been there since the beginning. There were younger faces, too, kids discovering punk for the first time. That was Brian's true legacy. His music didn't belong to the past. It belonged to anyone bold enough to pick up a guitar and make something wild and real. On March 6, 2025, Brian James passed away. His wife, Minna, his son, Charlie, and his daughter-in-law, Alicia, were by his side. The world lost one of its greats. But his music, his influence, his spirit, they can never be lost. Brian James wasn't just a guitarist. He was a pioneer. He was the man who gave punk its first anthem, who showed the world that music didn't have to be polished or perfect to be powerful. He played like he had something to prove, like every note mattered. And they did. His legacy lives on in every punk band that came after him, in every musician who picks up a guitar and refuses to follow the rules. He didn't chase fame. He didn't care about being a rock star. He just wanted to play. And in doing that, he changed the world. Brian James is gone, but his music, that will never die.